Welcome back to I Just Have to Say with Laura Max. I am so excited to join you for today's episode because we're going to talk about something really fun. We are going to do several book reviews. I have read some incredible books lately, and there is nothing I love more than reading a really good book and recommending it to a friend because I get to talk all about it and everything I loved about the book. I almost think I read books anticipating telling people about the books that I've read. And if we've ever spoken in Instagram direct messages, if you've ever asked me for a book review, you know I get super into it. I like to ask you about what you like to read and give you a recommendation that's very, very specific to who you are and what you enjoy doing and what your life is like. And I very rarely only have one book recommendation. I usually have many, depending on who you are and what you like reading. But this is super fun for me because I actually got into reading this year. I'm 35 years old. I'm turning 36 in November. And don't let anyone tell you that you cannot come into a new hobby when you are in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, however old you are. You could be 100 and stumble upon something that really brings you joy. Um, Reading for me was something that I did like once a year, maybe sometimes once every 2 years. There would be an extremely virally popular book that I would just have to read because I had to know what was going on in the cultural zeitgeist. So, books that fall into that category would be Eat, Pray, Love, Twilight, things that we've all heard of. Most of them have had movies made after them. That's how popular they are. I would read those. I would love the experience. And then the story I would have in my mind was that those were really the only books I would enjoy reading because they had to be super, super, super popular for me to have the patience to sit down and want to read them. Now, I think two things happened. One, I was wrong. I would have loved reading before. I just didn't really understand how many amazing books were out there. But two, and I have a real theory about this, a lot of the books that I read were written either from 2012 to now. So most of them weren't written before 2012. And what happened in 2012 was that we started buying books over Amazon at a much higher rate, and we started rating these items and writing about them. And what ended up happening was authors, I believe, caught on to the books that were getting really, really high ratings and really, really great reviews, and they started writing more of those books. And guess what? Books got better. So I don't think it's just me. I don't think I've randomly stumbled upon um a really fun hobby that I didn't enjoy at all previously that I suddenly really love. I actually think books have gotten insanely good. And it's one thing I love about technology and about algorithms. We talk so much about the downsides of technology, but I really, really try to look at the positive as much as I possibly can. And I get so excited thinking about how amazing it is that I could seriously read for the rest of my life and I would have one book after the next and I wouldn't run out of books, which is unbelievable to think about. So I absolutely have fallen in love with reading this year, which many of you know started with Colleen Hoover. I'd read some Colleen Hoover books in the past when they first came out. It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us and Verity, her three most popular books. And I never picked up another Colleen Hoover book. I'm not really sure what prompted me to buy another one. I'm thinking it was either November 9th or Ugly Love. It was recommended so often on my Instagram feed. People were reading these books, and I'm like, okay, I've got to check this. I've got to check these books out. So I ordered them. I had the paperback copies. I read them and I didn't want the books to end. So I just kept buying more and more and more and reading them on the Kindle app on my phone, actually. And I had heard from my friends who were into the Kindle app as well that having the actual Kindle was amazing if you like reading books on a Kindle. So I bought the Kindle recently, and it's true, it has been so much better than reading on my phone. And I've read every single book written by Colleen Hoover, which you know if you've listened to previous episodes of this podcast. And fallen in love with some other authors as well. So I'm going to dive in and talk about some books I've read recently and tell you what I think. So, the first book I want to talk about is the book I finished most recently, which is by Mary Kubica. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. It's called Local Woman Missing, and it was published in 2021. And this book was actually recommended to me in 2021 when it first came out. And this is really funny. I read the first two chapters. I'm typically very into true crime, very into mystery books. The first two chapters of this book were so dark and so scary that I didn't want to keep reading it. That being said, it was recommended to me so many more times since that first time. And I had it in my Kindle library. And finally, someone who I really trust with a good book recommendation told me I had to read it. And I finally picked it up maybe a week ago. I think I read it in 3 or 4 days. Guys, this was the best whodunit mystery maybe I've ever read, honestly. It does have the best of book talk hashtag. So you know it's going to be good because of that. And it's an Amazon editor's pick with 4.5 stars on Amazon. I felt like I needed to read this book with a notepad, like I was a detective. She really this author really led you down the road of thinking that pretty much every character in this book could have committed the crime in question. And the way she did it was so brilliant. I was completely gripped. I didn't feel like this book had a real flaw. I think sometimes I will read books and they're really good, but they're also like really corny, or they're really good and the author rushes through the ending. She touched on every single detail. I was so enamored with this book. I was walking around just recommending it to everybody I ran into while I was reading it. And this is the other really funny part. The first two chapters, which were the reason why I put the book down 4 years ago or 3 years ago in the first place, yes, they were very dark, but the rest of the book isn't really like that at all. The rest of the book is solving the mystery that is laid out by those first two chapters. And I was out late at night walking my dog on my very dark street, and I was a little freaked out while I was reading this book. That's true. Did make me a little scared to be alone in my house at night. But if you can get through that, I have to say, this book wasn't a dark read, and it was really really incredible to just go along with this author and get to know the characters and get to like really 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 think about who could have committed this crime. This is my favorite part though. I got it right pretty much. I had a guess in the beginning. She had gone into detail about a character in the book, and I kept asking myself why she was giving us so much detail about this character, and that the only reason she could be doing that, because this wasn't a character I would otherwise need that much information about, had to be because this person was involved somehow in the crime. Now, I could be talking about anyone. So that was not a spoiler because she goes into detail about a lot of characters, but this one in particular, um, I got a little alarm bell about, and I was actually right, which I'm totally shocked by that. So highly, highly recommend Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica if you're looking for a mystery thriller. This honestly read like a true crime novel in many ways. I absolutely loved it. Speaking of true crime novels, I was telling a friend of mine the other day that I think as a society, have we replaced true crime and true crime podcasts with romantasy? Is that what we're into right now? I think maybe, because about a year ago, all I was hearing about was true crime podcasts, and everybody had another podcast that was coming out that they were listening to with another true crime story. Um, and now we're hearing about romantasy and all these books that are coming out that are, multiple books to a series, and there are bookshops opening all over the country that are selling these books. And I'm wondering if maybe we've switched, but that's a conversation for another day. Speaking of romantic novels, which I've probably read more of, I know I've read more of than mystery novels. The other book I've read recently was Archer's Voice by Mia Sheridan. If you've read any romantic fiction books recently, I'm sure Archer's Voice has come up as a recommendation for you. I highly recommend reading it. It was one of my favorite stories I've read this year. I recommended it to a friend of mine who's reading it now, and I cannot wait to discuss it with her. It is a mystery. It's primarily a romance. It's primarily a love story, but there are incredible elements of mystery in the book. It is very spicy. Just a warning, it's probably one of the spicier books I've ever read, which was interesting because it was one of the better stories I've ever read. So I was fascinated that this book could be both. I loved Mia Sheridan's writing. This is the first book I have ever read of hers, and it will not be my last. I'm currently reading Unwanted, which is another book of hers that has amazing reviews. So I will definitely do a book review on Unwanted. But Archer's Voice had a lot of the sort of romantic tropes that we have gotten familiar with: small town love story, woman with a traumatizing past, man with a traumatizing past. So, um, it was easy for me to sort of write off my love of this book as me loving like yet another cheesy book, but it definitely wasn't. It had a lot of powerful themes and it was extraordinarily well written. I think there are a lot of books out there that could read like a Hallmark movie and actually be really cheesy and not a book that you remember, but this was not that. And if you read the reviews of Archer's Voice, most of them will tell you that it's, their favorite book that they've ever read. And it really does deserve those accolades. It really is a fantastic read. And if you're looking for a really fast, really, really, really engaging romance mystery, I highly recommend Archer's Voice. Next, I want to get into Rebecca Yarros. So I haven't talked about Rebecca Yarros. I've been so busy doing all these podcasts on Colleen Hoover and It Ends With Us that I haven't gotten to dive into my love of Rebecca Yarros. So, Rebecca Yarros is the writer of The Fourth Wing. She's the author of The Fourth Wing, which has been number one on the Amazon charts all year long. She has totally exploded. She lives in Colorado Springs, which is about 4 hours away from me. I believe she has 5 or 6 children. I think it's actually 6. Sorry if I'm wrong about that. And she's married to a man in the military. So she is a military wife and she has all this experience with the military, and that is woven into all of the books of hers that I've read so far, which include The Things We Leave Unfinished, In the Likely Event, and The Last Letter. So I've only read these 3 books of hers, but I read them sequentially. So I read them in a row in the order that I just listed them. And after I finished each one, I went to go tell my friend who reads all of my book recommendations, which I just so appreciate and love because then I get to talk about these books with her. She read them in the same order. And by the end of it, by the time I'd finished the last book of hers that I read, which was The Last Letter, I had had enough of like the military love story theme. Like each one of these books had some element of that. And it's so clearly such a huge part of her life, which is why she's able to write about it so articulately and so well. But this is really funny. So I read these 3 books and I kind of ended up feeling a little bit embarrassed that I had recommended them to my friend in order because by the time I was done, I'm like, "Oh, this is just too much military." And now I've recommended that to her and what is she going to think? And she said the same thing. She's like, "I was kind of militaried out by the time I was done reading these." But now that I've read some other books, I miss her. She is one of those authors that writes in a way, the only way I can describe it is she writes in a way that feels like home. She feels like a home base author to me. Does that make any sense? I've never really said that out loud about anyone or any author in my life, but she feels like she's probably one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite. I don't know if she's my favorite, but she's definitely up there. And I missed her stories. I'm ready to read another one of her military love story mysteries. I think her writing is fantastic. I think it's engaging. I think if you struggle to read Colleen Hoover because you don't like her writing style, but you do like her stories, you're going to love Rebecca Yarros. I'm usually gripped by her books from the very, very first chapter. Each of these books were fantastic, and my friend and I both agreed that the best of the 3 was The Things We Leave Unfinished. If you read no other book by Rebecca Yarros, please read that one. And I haven't read The Fourth Wing yet. I really haven't read a romantasy novel yet in my life besides the Twilight series. I'm like putting that off because they tend to be, 6 books to a series, and I don't feel like I have time for that. So I haven't done that yet. I haven't read The Fourth Wing, but of the books that I've read, the Things We Leave Unfinished was epic and it was incredibly well written. Definitely the best of those 3. The second best, I think, was The Last Letter. I really did like In the Likely Event. These 2 books are different, but they're both very heavy on the military storyline. And the military plays a large role in both of them. But they were really just engrossing. And a lot of people will tell you that when they read The Last Letter, they couldn't stop crying, bring a box of tissues. I did not cry. My friend who read it did. I actually found the ending of that book to be almost like there was too much. There was just too much to be sad about. And I was emotionally drained from all of the different sort of tragic themes that were woven through this book. But it was an epic read nonetheless. And In the Likely Event, this is funny. I'm saying that it's like my 3rd on the list, but I was completely wrapped up in that book when I was reading it. I don't want to say that it's 3rd because I want you to read it. Like I thought it was a great book. It didn't have, when I was talking about Local Woman Missing not really having a flaw. In the Likely Event was a book that had a flaw. It was a book that went back and forth quite a lot. It could be very jarring to read, and you kind of wanted more from it, but it was still so worth reading and so good. I recommend all three of her books that I've read very highly. Okay, so I'm going to put links to all those books in the show notes, and I'm going to end this episode by giving you my final Colleen Hoover recommendations. I have done many episodes on Colleen Hoover, on the Colleen Hoover books that I recommend. And today, what I want to do is I want to give you the books that I think of every time I think about Colleen Hoover and why I love her as an author, why I fell in love with her as an author. There are a few books that pop right into my head. So I'm going to share those with you if you're someone who's never read a Colleen Hoover book, or if you're someone who's only read It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us. My recommendations for your next Colleen Hoover read are Hopeless and Losing Hope. Those are 2 books in a 5-book series, but you can definitely get away with just reading those 2, although I don't think that you'll want to. I think you're going to want to read all 5. Hopeless and Losing Hope stand out to me as her best books. If you read the reviews, in terms of her fan base, her true fan base, a la me, um, many agree that these are her best 2 books, which is really funny because we hear so much more about Verity and It Ends With Us, It Starts With Us. These are her more popular titles, but I absolutely love Hopeless and Losing Hope. The other one that I'm really surprised that I remember this book as fondly as I do, it was an amazing read, but it is still a book that I think about, is Slammed. Slammed was her first book ever, and Slammed is part of a 3-book series. The first 2 in the series, I think, are really great reads. And of course, by the time you've read those 2, you're going to want to read the last one. But I am only highly, highly recommending the first 2, which are Slammed and Point of Retreat. I think they're really fantastic, wonderful books. And in terms of standalone novels, my favorite standalone by Colleen Hoover is a very popular Colleen Hoover book, and it's Ugly Love. So I highly recommend checking those out. Honorable mention goes to November 9. I have a hard time choosing between November 9 and Ugly Love. I guess I just did, but I think they're kind of interchangeably amazing. So check those out. I will put all of the links to these books in the show notes, and tell me which book you want me to read next. I love your recommendations. I love coming on here and talking about books with you guys, and reading my next one at the moment. So more to come, and I'll talk to you guys soon. I hope you have a great day.